Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. This talk is a continuation from the previous one, some simple but key points about voidness. I'd like to carry on today to explain why the topic of voidness is so important in Dharma, to talk about the meaning of exists and doesn't exist, and about some of the mistakes we can make. But first of all, why is so much importance put on this idea of voidness? And there's two main senses: non-ego, the voidness of a self, and the voidness of things, phenomena. And the Sanskrit word for phenomena is simply dharma, things. The voidness of self, the voidness of things. Well, the reason's simple. It's because all of the Buddha's teaching is there to help us to suffer less, and maybe in the end not to suffer ever anymore, and to be happier. And when we look at the way happiness and suffering works, we see they depend so much on the way we construct the idea of me and the way that we define and describe and experience what is not ourselves. In other words, other people and the world around us. It's a question on a gross level of storytelling, the way we tell the story of me to ourselves, the way we tell the story of him and her, how he is, how she is, what he's doing, what she's doing, what our nation, our society is doing, and so on. It's on a gross level in that storytelling, the internal monologue that becomes our dialogue with other people, that our happiness and our suffering is situated. And then on many more and more subtle levels, that we have a similar process, but not with such gross, lumbering thoughts, easy to recognize, perhaps not so hard to change by learning to tell ourselves a new story, but much more subtle, fleeting movements, moods, postures of our mind. But in the end, it all comes back to this feeling, this definition, this image of me and of other, of dharma, of phenomena. If the image is true, that's one thing. But if the image is too rigid, untrue, sometimes very fixed, and we see people sometimes are so rigid-minded about themselves, they have such a rigid and often wrong projection, definition of other people or of situations, then that can be a big cause of suffering. So the reason that voidness is important is that by seeing through the illusions, by understanding the illusions and the projections, we can then choose how we want our mind to work. The storytelling up until now kind of just happened. Life happened. We grew up. Life happened. But we come to a certain point where we realize we can, if we want, change things. And voidness becomes perhaps the most powerful tool in that process. Voidness hinges around the term of exists and doesn't exist. And here we have a big problem. It's a translator's problem, but not just translating words. It's a question of translating one culture, one religion, with its implicit understanding of something, into a world which doesn't have that implicit understanding. So when we hear a teacher say, or when we read in a book, does not exist, we understand that in the everyday English language way. Of course, that's natural. How else? Meaning has no existence at all. Whereas it doesn't mean that. It means does not exist ultimately. It's to do with philosophy. It's to do with absolute truth. So we really need to understand, what would something need to do if it did exist ultimately, satisfactorily for philosophers? It would have to exist in its own right, all by itself, independently of anything else. Nothing does. Everything depends on something else to be what it is, and not just on one something else, on an endless fabric network of things to be what it is in that moment. Not only that, from one moment to the next even, there's change. One moment is an amazing coming together of millions of things in a web of interdependence to make that moment of experience, and then it's gone, and it's another amazing concatenation of things to make the next moment. The colors you are seeing as you look at this video are to do with surfaces, light, your eye, the nerves from your eye to your brain, the activity of your brain, your consciousness, your cognitive processes. So many things coming together to make this image you're seeing right now. Quite where the image is, it looks like it's out there to you. Whether it's out there in your consciousness, in your brain, in fact you won't find it. But that's not the point here. The point is that it is the coming together of many things. There is no such thing as a color out there. Without eyes to see, there is no color. Whatever a wall or a shirt or fruit or whatever you can see is, it only has color when an eye looks at it. Color is what eyes see. We tend to think of the wind and the cooing of turtle doves and the blowing of wind chimes that I can just hear outside here in Provence as sounds which are there. But in fact, they're not sounds until they reach a human ear. It's just vibrations, silent vibrations. It's the coming together of the wind chime, the wind, the chimes, the air in between, there's no vacuum, an ear, the nerves, the brain, the cognitive process. All of those different things coming together in one instant make the experience. And it's gone, and it's a new experience afterwards. So when we look into that, it becomes very clear that any fixed idea of that is as something that lasts, as something that is in its own right, independent of anything else. It's obvious that they're not only delusions, but when those ideas become fixed and lasting, and they define us, and they define our world, that they can be the cause of a lot of trouble, And of course we all see this around us, and perhaps in ourselves as well. Somebody who says, I can't be happy unless I have this. I can't be happy unless I achieve this. I can't be happy unless I have affection, someone to live with, a partner, and so on. People define themselves in a very fixed way. They define their world. So when their idea of me and my needs and my happiness marries well with the world they're experiencing and defining, they're happy. But when it doesn't, then they suffer.